Gayathri, welcome to Aussie Indian.
Well, thank you so very much, and namaste, and welcome to all our viewers as well.
Thank you. And you have come to Sydney for the first time, Gayathri?
Yes, it is my first time.
We have put on fantastic weather for you.
It is absolutely brilliant.
We do that all the time. And of course, you have come here with a message apart from staying with your friend and having a look around Sydney. This mental health issue is very close to your heart. Before we start on that, maybe we can understand your background, where you come from and where you got educated and how you ended up in the United States of America.
Absolutely. I am originally from Bangalore, India, and I was born and raised in a very large extended family of 23 people.
Why am I feeling nostalgic?
I know.
It's my hometown too.
I know. Grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. And ever since I was a little girl, my parents dreamed, like most parents did, and do still, that I would grow up, go to college, graduate, get married, have a couple of children, and live happily ever after. And if I was very, very lucky, they prayed that they would find me a successful Indian man in America to marry. Because after all, America was nirvana back then. And believe it or not, all our dreams came true.
Excellent.
But never in our worst nightmares did we imagine that I would one day get locked up in the isolation cell of a psychiatric ward in America.
Really?
And that's exactly where my Indo-American odyssey through mental illness led me.
Right. That's a very interesting story. And obviously, looking at you, you have successfully come out of it. And that's one message, obviously, you want to give to our viewers. And before we do that, how do we define mental illness?
Well, mental illness and mental health, as with all illness and wellness, is a continuum. The way I define mental illness or mental wellness, as I do with physical illness or wellness, is the ability to function or not. The ability to have a meaningful, functional life and relationships within the community and the family. And so that is my distinction between illness and wellness. Whether a person can have a meaningful life, can work efficiently, can perform at school or their jobs proficiently, can have meaningful relationships and thrive within the context of their individual families and the general community at large. And anything that comes short of it, that disables you from thriving in your life and reaching your own full potential, is illness.
Yes. Well, that probably becomes very subjective, isn't it? It's not as clear-cut as 2 and 2 equals 4.
It isn't, and it is. There is a point at which the chronicity of the symptoms and the level of disability of the symptoms clearly qualify for criteria for a particular mental illness. You're right in that we don't have any clear diagnostics, not a blood draw or an X-ray that can clearly tell an individual or the clinician, yes, this is depression, or yes, this is schizophrenia. So at this point in time, although tremendous strides have been made in science and research, and we do have a greater understanding of what symptoms and manifestation of mental illness and its impact on the human body and mind are, we don't yet have that one definitive test as yet. And so it does become subjective of how the individual experiences the symptoms and is able to express those symptoms. And this is where even the family members become really important in noticing those significant changes in their loved one, so they can be a better ally and an advocate.
Right. Well, if one wants to identify that a particular person has got some mental illness, basically because of the social stigma attached to the mental illness, people with mental illness, they may not readily come forward and admit to it. How do you address such problems?
As with my own life, I come from a fairly, highly educated family. I myself had an undergraduate degree in science, so it isn't that we were completely uneducated. But when it comes to matters of mental health, even today, most of us are ignorant.
Right.
And I think that's the fundamental problem, the lack of awareness of the early signs and symptoms. For example, it wasn't until I became suicidally depressed and acted on the suicidal ideation, actively trying to strangle myself or bury myself or slash my wrist, that my family finally were awakened to the fact that this is way beyond just normal grief or sorrow or momentary mood, shift in moods, that this was something profoundly different and dangerous, that they had to seek expert help outside of the realm of the family physician. So it is really a matter of creating awareness amongst ourselves to the basic understanding of what is mental wellness and what is mental illness, the distinction between the two, that we can help ourselves and others we know, whether it's a loved one in the family or a friend or a colleague.
Well, how did you manage to come out of it?
For me, really, as I mentioned, I went, like most people in this world do, I went undiagnosed for about 7.5 years.
Right.
And it spiraled out of control gradually and eventually. And even after, for example, my first trip back home to India, I'd already struggled with severe postpartum depression, not that I knew what that was about. And I got to India hoping that going home to my family would cure all my ills, and that wasn't the case. I had a massive breakdown, and that was my first time in life where I became very actively suicidal. In about 2 weeks, I had lost 15 pounds. I couldn't function. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I would be crying most of the day, very withdrawn, and just absolutely unable to function. And I would actively beg my parents to kill me.
Really?
I would ask them, do you love me? And when they, of course, my parents would, of course we love you. What do you mean? I'd say, well, if you love me, then you're going to help me you're going to help me end this life, because I saw no hope. And that's one of the hallmark symptoms of depression, this utter sense of hopelessness and despair, from which the individual believes the only way out is death. And so, it is in that incredible crisis that my parents finally, took me back to our family physician, who all these years had not understood what it was that I was struggling with, then rushed me to a psychiatrist, and I had the diagnosis. But that didn't really necessarily help because of the stigma. Now we were terrified. We had a diagnosis of mental illness, but we were terrified of the impact of this diagnosis on my life, my husband's life, his career, my daughter's life, and my brothers and sisters, because we often worry in India, as with many other cultures, what is the impact of this diagnosis going to be on our life? Are we going to lose our job? Am I going to lose my marriage? Is anybody going to marry my brother or my sister? Are they going to point fingers at my daughter and tell her that her mother is crazy? So all these fears kept me, really terrified. And even though I lived in America, I was still living with the same stigma that my culture, and it's not that people in America don't struggle with stigma. We all do, the world over, as people in Australia do as well. And we continued to live like a prisoner in our own homes, me and my husband. And I got pregnant by accident again, which only worsened. In my case, my depression is triggered by changes in my hormonal cycles and stress and all of that.
Right.
And eventually ended up seeking hospitalization. And because I was suicidal, hospital policy is that they had to admit me to a locked ward, which is the isolation cell. But ultimately, the question is for me, I got locked up twice within 10 days because I also lost the baby. I was pregnant when I chose to get hospitalized. And so looking back, getting locked up is what set me free. For the first time in my life, I began to ask myself these questions. Am I crazy, or is the world around me crazy? Is psychiatric care traumatic or therapeutic? And most of all, what is the purpose of my life? And the answers to me were finally clear, that the purpose of my life really was to not only fight for my own dignity and freedom as a human being, but to dedicate the rest of my life to educating myself about mental health issues, first and foremost, to recovering and to creating a functional and meaningful life for myself, but ultimately to dedicate my life to helping others like myself in this world. And by others, I mean there are 450 million men, women, and children around the world that are struggling with mental health issues, who unfortunately aren't as fortunate as me for having found the care and the treatment that I needed, and for having as supportive a family as I have had in my life. So it was really in that isolation cell that I promised that I would forever dedicate my life to promoting awareness about mental health issues and raising awareness in the general community, not just in people that are struggling with these issues and their families. Because as a mother and as a human being, it's really important for me to let people know that 50% of the onset of mental health issues begin by the age of 14. Unlike many other chronic illnesses like diabetes and heart disease, mental illnesses are disorders that have a very early onset. But the good news is, with enough awareness about these disorders, with access to treatment and the right supports, both in the family and in the community, people can absolutely recover and thrive. And I am a living testimonial to that.
Well, how did you snap out of it? Basically, because you're saying that you were in that isolation cell and there you did introspection and you virtually asked yourself various questions about yourself, your surroundings, and your place in this world. Is that what the self-realization and self-introspection that brought out the realities of life for you?
Absolutely. It was a time of great trauma, but it was also a turning point in my life, where for the first time, it didn't matter what others thought of me, whether they thought I was crazy or not. For the first time, I began to ask myself, what do I think about myself? What do I think about mental illness and mental wellness? What is the greater purpose of my life? And it is in those moments that it became utterly clear to me that illness and wellness are part of the human condition and continuum. And it didn't matter if others or even myself had, carried this burden and fear and shame of stigma about mental illness. At that point in time, I became fully realized and aware that I am just yet another child of God. I am complete just the way I was, and my life's journey was in realizing my fullest potential. And there was nothing and nobody. It wasn't mental illness, it wasn't the locked isolation cell, or it wasn't society that looked down upon people like me and called us crazy. It wasn't even my own fears that were self-limiting. It wasn't the fears of my family. That nothing ever could contain my spirit and lock it up ever again. And you're right, it wasn't snapping out. It was a very painful, very self-determined and difficult step-by-step climb literally out of that deep, dark abyss.
Would you say that some of this modern medicine also helped in the process?
I have had electric shock treatments. It's called they're called ECTs, electroconvulsive therapy, or in layman's terms, shock treatment. I have had several different antidepressants, several different anti-anxiety medications. And in my particular case, I don't know if they helped, but I know that they hurt. In the sense, most of these medications actually worsen or exacerbate the symptoms of depression and anxiety that I struggle from. And I know from research that I'm not alone. 25 to 30% of the people with depression are not helped by any of the psychotropic drugs that we have in the marketplace as yet. And then the question becomes, well, what else can help? And for me, I was very fortunate that I've had many people, I call them angels, in my life that have opened up new worlds and new pathways to healing. So for example, very interestingly, it was an American physician during my major hospitalization in the US that actually introduced me to pranayama and transcendental meditation.
Breathing exercises.
Pranayama is there are various different forms of pranayama, of course, but collectively they are a form of deep breathing. And in transcendental meditation, now both these healing techniques originated in India, our home country, but it's ironic that I had to nearly lose my life and my sanity and travel all the way from India to America for American teachers to teach me Indian healing practices.
Yeah.
But what is very important that, I realized in the years to come is the discipline to practice these techniques every single day.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a matter of practicing it, for a week or two and stopping and then picking it up. And these are wellness, practices that I have incorporated over the last 23 years. And I am incredibly grateful for that physician for having introduced me to these techniques.
Right. So would you say that pranayama and meditation is the turning point of your life?
I would say that they are one or two of the most important healing practices that I have integrated into my life, because there are many other aspects to wellness as well, and many other wellness strategies, if you must, say so. Exercise is very, very important. There's much research done about the benefits of exercise, not only to our mental health, but also to our physical health and overall well-being. So again, I wasn't exercising regularly before I got ill, but certainly, in many ways, looking back, struggling as I did and being as sick as I was a blessing in disguise, because it really gave me this incredible incentive to start looking to practice and integrate wellness into my life. So exercise is definitely another, wellness tool that I have integrated into my life. I exercise at least 5 times a week when I'm not traveling and having way too much fun. And when I'm traveling, I try to walk as much as I can.
Is that the best exercise?
It is a wonderful form of exercise, for a lot of reasons. First of all, it is exercise. Second, you're out in nature, hopefully, convening with nature, which in of itself can be an extremely healing experience. So, definitely. And many times you walk with a friend and, you've got that connection with another human being. And so social connections are, again, a phenomenal, important tool in our well-being. So there's hydration, drinking enough water, and especially for people with depression, abstaining from alcoholic beverages could be a very good idea, because alcohol is a depressant. I've never, it's just by choice. I've never had a cup of coffee or tea or alcohol in my life. So water is my drink of choice, and that is to my favor. Yes, and it's free.
Yeah, it is.
And nutrition, paying attention to eating healthy meals. And again, thanks to our incredibly rich and varied Indian heritage, which is so well balanced in its nutrition and nutritional practices, and so I'm really, really grateful for that, gift of our culture as well. Having meaningful relationships and nurturing, loving relationships. A lot of times, mental illness not only causes discord and disability within the individual, but it, makes them unable to have meaningful, sustaining relationships with other people. And that can be a vicious cycle in of itself, the disconnect, the isolation that we struggle with. So, even in times, the worst of times, I've been very, very fortunate to have a family that has always stood by me and loved me and supported me unconditionally.